In this newsletter video, we will listen to Michael Ellis explain his concept on how to train food refusal to a dog. At some point in time, Michael and I may produce a video on this subject.
Hello, I'm Michael Ellis, and today we're going to talk about teaching food refusal to your dog. Food refusal is also a ring sport exercise. So in both the French, the Belgian, and the Mondial ring, as well as KNPV, there are food refusal exercises. Exercises where at some point the dog is offered food and they must not take it. In the ring sports, they also place food on the field at various levels in various places to try to distract the dog from their job. Teaching the food refusal is a fairly simple exercise. We put it on a cue and teach the dog that it's a situational exercise, meaning I'm going to leave you here and somebody's going to come offer you something, you can't take it. So there are a couple of steps that we use and a couple of different techniques we bring together to make the finished product. The first step is to teach the dog a leave it command yourself. And I start this in two ways. The first of which is I will put my dog on a down, I'll sit in front of the dog on the floor, I'll set a piece of food on the ground, I'll say leave it, and I'll uncover the food with my hand. If the dog reaches for the food, I say no and cover the hand and remind them to leave it. At the point where the dog ignores the food, doesn't look at the food after I've set it down, I release the dog and either throw a toy for the dog or give the dog another piece of food with my other hand. So they're learning the cue, leave it, I'm going to place a piece of food in front of you, I uncover the food, if they try to go for the food, I cover it, remind them to leave it, and we progress that way. The second thing that I teach my dog is to ignore something that's dropped in front of you. And I start with non-food items. So I put my dog on a down again, I walk up with some item, I use a plastic bottle cap, it doesn't make a rock, it doesn't matter what it is. I come up, I tell my dog to leave it, and I drop the item on the ground just out of their reach. If they try to investigate what it is, I say nope, leave it, and remind them to leave it. If they do leave it, I step up toe-to-toe with them, release them, and either play tug with them or throw a toy for them, either one. The reason that I go through this step of releasing the dog and playing with the dog is later on in our food refusal exercise, it's relatively easy to pressure a dog into not taking food. But the problem is, if I put too much pressure on my dog not to take the food, then when food's offered, frequently the dog will get up and leave, won't stay in that position. They'll get up and return to the handler or leave the place where the food was dropped. So by rewarding the dog, the person offering the food, or in this case the non-food item to the dog, by rewarding the dog there, then the dog is much more likely to stay there and ignore the food. Also, with many of our working dogs, their desire for a toy overrides their desire for a food. So if in a certain circumstance they're offered food and then they get a toy, eventually they'll ignore the food for the higher value toy. So once as a handler I can drop different items, not food items, in front of the dog and the dog will ignore them, I simply take food and rub the food on the non-food items and do the same process over again. So I put my dog on a down, I walk up to the dog, I have bottle caps, rocks, whatever, rubbed with a hot dog, I drop those on the ground in front of the dog. If the dog reaches out to sniff them, I say no, leave it. If they ignore them, I step up to the dog, I release the dog and play tug with the dog. Once the dog will do that with me, I do the same thing with food. So the final step is I tell my dog leave it, I walk up, I drop the food just out of the dog's reach. If the dog attempts to get the food, I say no and cover the food either with my foot. If the dog ignores the food, I step up, release the dog, and play tug with the dog. Once I've got this with the handler doing it with their own dog, we transition to having someone else do the same thing. So at first the handler is next to the dog, on leash. We bring the dog up, we down the dog, we say leave it, we step just out of the dog's range. Someone else comes up, tosses food, or depending on how far along in the process the dog is, tosses a non-food item. The dog ignores the item, the assistant steps up, toe-to-toe with the dog, releases the dog, and plays tug with the dog. And you gradually progress through the steps until the handler is out of sight and the food offerer will actually stop and throw the food right under the dog's nose or right between his feet. There's a lot of proofing that goes into this exercise. So once my dog understands the cue to leave it, then I set up different circumstances. to teach the dog that once I've said leave it, you can be offered food in a variety of ways. The most traditional, of course, is having someone come up and toss a piece of food to my dog. I might have somebody come up with food on a plate and dump the whole plate. I might have somebody come up with a dog food bowl and set the dog food bowl just out of the dog's reach and dump a scoop of food into it. Anytime we change the picture, the handler comes back in the picture to support the dog and correct the dog if the dog makes a mistake. If the dog's good, we have an assistant or the handler return to the dog, release the dog, and play with the dog.
If you'd like to watch some of the free streaming videos that I have on my website, you can go to this web address now. I have a number of free streaming training videos and then a number of product videos also.